Hannah Neumann, member of the European Parliament, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
You said that inviting the Taliban to Brussels is not technical. And how is that pushback going?
If you have to discuss things with the Taliban on deportation, you can do that in Kabul, right? And there have been technical teams from Brussels that went to Kabul to discuss with the Taliban. Why is it that the Taliban now want to have these very same discussions in Brussels? Well, because they want to be invited to the capital of Europe, because they want to have the pictures, they want to have the handshake, so everything that looks like they are back at the table, that they are being normalized. And I think for no reason we should give it to them. I just want to remind everyone, and I continue to remind people here in Europe about it. In 2021, all EU member states came together. They said there need to be clear benchmarks for engagement with the Taliban. It was 5 benchmarks. One was to let international personnel leave Afghanistan. Okay, gone. The other one was Taliban upholding human rights. Well, on that one, we saw a backlash far worse than anyone expected. They said humanitarian access for everyone. Well, that's not working. They said the Taliban need to combat terrorism.
Right.
They are becoming a safe haven for terrorism. And they said an inclusive governance. And we are like so far away from inclusive governance. So why now start an engagement when they just move back on everything?
Why now?
Germany set a very bad precedent. Because we saw in Germany, the German government, because they wanted to deport Afghans for, I would say, very short-sighted populist reasons. They started this talking to the Taliban, and the Taliban basically blackmailed them. So the Taliban first said, so we need to be invited for talks. That's what we had in Germany about 2 years ago.
Right.
Next thing the Taliban said, but we need to take over the consulates again. That's what then the Germans gave to them. So the Taliban said, and then we would take back a few Afghans. So where are we in Germany right now? About 50 Afghans were sent back to Afghanistan.
In 2 years.
In 2 years, in return, 2 Taliban representatives are now in the consulates in Berlin and Bonn,
Right.
having a lot of terrible potential for European security, for Afghan security. I'm pretty sure we can talk about that later. And now there were a number of other EU member states that they actually thought that would be a good idea. I don't know how come. And now they asked the European Commission to basically do it for them. So there were a number of member states that said, dear European Commission, can you please invite the Taliban for technical talks, what they call technical talks.
I heard there are about like 20 member states.
Well, the number I have is 17. So apparently 17 said, we want to have what the Germans have. They tasked the European Commission to do that. And then the European Commission was, stupid enough to take that task and now to do it. And I'm afraid they might run into the very same situation with Germany, where now there was one of these deportation planes scheduled, I think, 2 days ago. And the Taliban said, well, but we're going to refuse it until we have more personnel in more consulates. So we clearly see that they just use this for their very egoistic blackmailing. And I think we really need to stop the European Union for getting engaged in the same game.
And what is your strategy for 17 members of Europe, of the EU, to have a sort of a smart way of addressing the migration issue?
Well, I mean, first of all, we are making quite a mess here right now to stop these technical talks from happening. So we are trying to engage with the European Commission, but especially with the European Union External Action Service from a foreign policy perspective to make everyone understand how dangerous it is to fall for Taliban blackmail, because Taliban will just ask for more, and more of these weird regimes will ask for the same thing. So we will just end up in a very terrible situation. We're trying to figure out with the Belgian government, they have to give the visa to the Taliban eventually, that they don't do that. So we're putting public pressure on them. So we are trying to make all of that very complicated. On the other hand, you're right. We also need to see with the member states how to deal with this issue. I mean, there is no way one could send back Afghans in general in line with the Geneva Convention and all the rules we have, because Afghanistan clearly is not safe. It's not safe for women, but frankly said, it's also not safe for most of the men that seek refuge here, because the Taliban are in power and they're just very cruel. We are only discussing about a very limited number of people that have either become criminal here in the European Union. We are talking especially about sex offenses, or people where where there might be a danger that they might engage in terrorist activities, for example. I actually don't think it's smart to just send them back to Afghanistan, because those that are sexual offenders, for example, they should be in prisons and not roaming around freely in Afghanistan. And those where we are afraid that they might commit terror acts, well, I'd rather have them under supervision here than just being back in Afghanistan. I have no clue what they are doing, how they might come back to Europe and what they stage there. So also from a security perspective, and I think that's the discussion we're having and the discussion I'm having with the German government, but also with the other governments, it simply doesn't make sense. So rather than falling for these populist, right-wing, short-sighted claims, I think we should have a proper discussion of what helps our security.
And would that help sort of to stop the flow of migrants coming to Europe from countries like Afghanistan?
Well, what would help to stop the flow from Afghans to come to Europe is to stop Taliban rule in Afghanistan, so people can just go back and rebuild their lives. And what we're doing with this is just stabilizing the Taliban, kind of giving them some aura of legitimacy and giving them the idea that whatever horrible they do, they would get away with it. And I rather think we should be very clear that with these kind of governments, we are not going to engage. We don't want to legitimize them. We're not going to talk to them. We are not going to hand over consulates to them. So we bring down these kind of governments rather than making it easier for them. This is what would, in the medium and long term, really stop migration. And frankly said, I just find it super cynical that there are so many people in Afghanistan where we promised them that we would support them, that we would protect them, that they would get visa and asylum. So those that worked for our institutions, for example, those that supported us or that we worked hand in hand with to confront the Taliban. And now they are stuck in a terrible security situation inside Afghanistan.
Or in Pakistan.
Or in Pakistan, or in Tajikistan, or in Turkey, or in Iran. While we start giving visas to the Taliban. I mean, how cynical and absurd is that? And then we have another group of people, the Afghans that were able to flee the Taliban, that they had asylum here right now, that they are clearly opposed to the Taliban. This is why they came here. Most of the Afghans are here because they were opposed to the Taliban. And now when we give the Taliban access to the consulates, we give them access to the addresses of all these people. And I mean, we see with the Iranian regime how bad transnational repression is. And I'm just afraid the Taliban will learn from them.
I remember you visited Afghanistan under the Taliban.
I did.
In 2022.
I think I did twice even.
Twice, yes.
I think 22 and 23. But
I remember you met once with the Minister of Education. And there was this picture of you talking to the Minister of Education of the Taliban and talking about girls' education. We are 3 years, 4 years after that visit. Do you see any progress or any change since then?
Back then they said, you know, we just need a little bit more time to work out the curricular. We need a little bit more time to work out the dress code. And since then, they just walk backwards. So back then it was just higher education being a problem for girls, but there was still university for women and there was still like the normal kind of education. Since then, well, the girls haven't been allowed to go to school. Then the women have been banned from university. Now, even for the primary education, it is very, very difficult for girls. And now it also becomes difficult for boys to get the kind of education that they need to be ready for the job market because they're also trying to push them more and more towards madrasas. So much has gone back. But there is actually, if you allow me, a bit of a funny story around the picture that you mentioned. Because for me, it was always the question, what do I do with the veiling?
Yes.
Because, I mean, it's not in my religion, it's not in my culture. So I wouldn't put a veil usually. When people ask me, for example, when I visited schools or hospitals to veil so they don't get in trouble with Taliban, then I would do it because I don't want to make people's life difficult. But then when I had the meeting with the Taliban, I was like, I'm not going to proactively veil. I just had the scarf around my neck. So it looked as if it just had fallen down, you know, and I was waiting for them to ask me to put it on. And then I might have a discussion because they come in their cultural clothes when they come here. So I guess I can come in my cultural clothes when I go there. But they never ever asked me. But the funny thing is the Minister of Education all the time either talked to the men next to me or he basically talked to my uterus because he couldn't look into my face. And I also had shoes like this, so he couldn't also look at my ankles. And they came with the official pictures, but they never actually published the pictures. So the only picture that exists is the one members of my team took. But this whole meeting, it was also a bit part of like, you know, my very own personal resistance to giving into their logic. And somehow I got away with it and he felt quite uncomfortable. And I think that's how it should be.
But you did, as sort of probably the only member of the European Parliament who traveled to Afghanistan.
I think I was about the only one, you're right.
Yes. So you did try, you did go and talk to them. You wanted to go to the country on your own and push for the rights of the
Well,
Afghan
I mean,
women.
I didn't go there to meet the Taliban. I went there to meet with the different women's organizations, women journalists, all those that were still trying to put up some kind of resistance, to uphold the work they do, and to just hear how they are doing, how we can support them, what their wishes are, how they assess the situation. So for me, that was key. And then, of course, I also had to somehow meet the Taliban. And it was my pleasure to tell him into his face that we think that this policy is quite dangerous for the country.
Right.
Because you're not just losing half of the workforce now. I mean, there will be no midwives. There will be no female doctors. Who's going to treat the women? I mean, this whole thing doesn't make any sense.
That's right.
And that was the kind of discussion I wanted to have with them, but also to bring the women's voices that they are no longer meeting. I mean, they are no longer meeting their own women in their own country. So I wanted to at least use my presence to bring these voices to them. But I have been trying for the last 2 years to go back again to Afghanistan.
And you're not welcome?
Well, the problem is I always got the visa from the Republic ambassadors, but they consider these visas as not valid anymore. And I haven't found a Taliban yet who was willing to give me a visa.
But you want to go if you're...
I think if I get the visa and if there's an opportunity to have substantial talks with the kind of people that are resisting the Taliban, then I would indeed go. If I would put these people into big danger and they would refrain from meeting with me and then I would end up only with the Taliban, then, I mean, why should I go?
If you want to go meet with the Taliban in Afghanistan, why they can't come to Brussels to meet you here?
I'm not saying we should not talk to the Taliban, but inviting them here, so giving them visas while we don't give visa to the people that fought with us against the Taliban. Giving them these super nice photo options here with shaking hands and being in the capital of Europe with the European flags. They just want this to show that they are back at the table, that they are being normalized, that they become part of the normal international affairs. That we shouldn't give to them. So for me, it's something very different, whether I sit with them in Taliban to have the tough discussions we need to have, or whether I invite them here and give them the platform that they seek so desperately.
And it's not only you who is finding it difficult to go back to Afghanistan. Richard Bennett can't go back to Afghanistan, the UN Special Rapporteur. Journalists like Lise Doucette have been saying publicly that they are trying to secure visas to go back. But in the same time, you see an entire entourage of Western YouTubers, the so-called Talib bros.
Yeah, well, yes, that's propaganda.
Are going. So they do cherry pick who can have access to the country.
No, clearly they do cherry pick and they use that as a propaganda tool. And I'm sad for everyone who falls for that.
EU8 right now is the largest donor for Afghanistan in the absence of reduction of American aid. Should aid be conditional? Should aid be given to the Afghan people regardless of how the Taliban rule the country?
I think we should never give the Taliban any budget support. That is very clear. So nothing that goes straight to the Taliban or that is channeled through organizations from which the Taliban benefit. I think that's a very hard line. And I think on the very basic aid, like, for example, preventing children from starvation, we need to do everything we can to push for example, that we can set the conditions on how we do that. So we pay for it, we set the conditions. And that's the hard fight we're having. I want women to be able to deliver this. I want women to be the main beneficiaries of this.
Right.
The Taliban are trying to interfere. There are regions where we can deliver better. That is where we are doing more. There are regions where it is more complicated. There it is indeed complicated. And it's a constant battle that we are having. And I'm afraid the battle is not going to get away. But I think we should continue fighting it, and ensure that we can deliver in the best way possible for the most vulnerable without the Taliban benefiting from it. And where where the balance goes the wrong way, we have to stop.
Ma'am, you are one of the very rare and strong voices, not only on Afghanistan, but also on Iran. Why is that? Why are you advocating for people of that region?
I mean, first of all, it's just about humans, and I don't care about the nationality. And it's just that they both suffer from regimes that are very brutal and very ignorant of the needs of their people, and where women are suffering a lot. So I think it's just a lot of, if I would have to live there, if I were them, what would that do to me? And I just don't want Europeans to just close their eyes on this. So I try to use some of my work in the European Parliament. I also work on like defense and trade agreements, but some of my work to just bring these stories and these voices and these needs also to the Parliament.
And do you think we're at a very critical moment in case of Iran, for instance, with the US-Iran negotiations going on. Are you hopeful that this deal would make the life of Iranian people better?
Before there was the war, we had broad sanctions on the Revolutionary Guards and on the regime. Everybody understood how brutal this regime was, especially after the massacres that we saw in January. There was a lot of appetite inside the country to bring down this regime, just people didn't know how and the tools. Khamenei was about to die anyways, anytime soon. Now we are 3 months into this war, and sadly, I see a terrible economic situation with a lot of people starving in the country. I see the Revolutionary Guards, which is the most ideological part of this government, stronger than ever. I see this regime all of a sudden being back in all the international fora, at all the negotiation tables. We are all of a sudden discussing sanctions relief, allowing them to sell their oil. They figured out that the Strait of Hormuz is even better than any nuclear bomb. They still have the enriched nuclear. They know how to make the Gulf countries very vulnerable. They have a choke point for all the economy. It's just like the situation is so much worse than before for Iranians, and that makes me feel very, very sad. But somehow, well, we are in a situation now where it's difficult to see a good way out.
And it's also a lesson that probably sort of a regime change can't be done from afar.
Well, I mean, that's a lesson we had to learn very painfully in Afghanistan. We had to learn very painfully in Iraq, where, I mean, there has been a regime change, but the country is not very stable. And now we have to kind of redo it in Iran. I just hope we could learn it like for good, that I truly believe regime change needs to come from the inside. It's nothing that can be enforced by violence or from the outside. I mean, there can be support from the outside, but it needs to come from the inside. And maybe we need to just be a bit more modest in the idea of, you know, what if only we wanted, like the Germans or the Europeans or the Americans, what we can do if only we wanted. I think our powers and our means are limited. And if we overestimate it, we actually make things worse.
How about the Afghan or the Iranian diaspora in the West in particular? What they can do differently?
The diaspora needs to find ways and means, but I think that's there to link with the people inside the country. And if they understand themselves as supporting the struggle of those inside the country because they are under far worse conditions, and kind of being their voice here when they can't speak, such as the Iranians right now because they are under the internet blackout, then I think the two coming together could be very strong. When there starts to be infighting, and I mean these regimes, the Taliban as well as the Revolutionary Guards, they love to sow division. If there's a growing division between the diaspora and those inside the country, then sometimes it gets more complicated, yes.
Why fighting for democracy in places like Afghanistan or Iran should be important for your country, Germany, for your parliament, the European Parliament, or to Europe as a whole?
For me, it's a very basic thing. We are all human beings. And I think every human being has a right to live a dignified life. And I mean, there's also this discourse, and it often comes from the autocrats and the authoritarian regimes that say like human rights, that's a Western value. But no matter which country I go in the world, if I ask a father, do you want your daughter to be tortured because she didn't wear the right clothes? Do you want your son to be killed because he speaks his mind at the age of 16, 18, 20? They say, no, we don't want that. So I don't think it's like a Western concept. It's just about human dignity. Do you want your baby to die from malnutrition because there's not enough food? No, nobody wants that. And these autocrats and dictators, and also some of the right-wing forces here, they want us to lose this very basic understanding of we are all human beings and we all have this right to dignified life. And I think we should just never lose that. I mean, one of the speeches I think I gave that has most resonance in Afghanistan, but also in the European Union, was when I said, imagine your mother in Afghanistan with a newborn child.
Right.
And what is the vision for that one? And that's what I mean, like a mother with a newborn in Afghanistan, to me, is no different than one in my constituency here in Germany. And I really think we need to adopt this perspective and then just ask from there, so what is a good political decision and what is a bad political decision? That's why I'm saying, so there are very few Afghan men that have been held accountable for sexual offenses, for example, in the European Union, that we should have in prison here. How can we think sending back to Afghanistan, having them run free, does any good? Is an Afghan woman's life, is it okay for an Afghan woman to be harassed so a German one isn't? Like,
Yes.
What the hell is this? I don't even want us to go down the road of thinking that way.
On that note, if you have two messages, one, let's say, for the Taliban leader, and one for that Afghan woman with a newborn baby, who might survive, who might not survive, what would be those two messages for two different audiences?
Wow. I mean, my first reaction to the Taliban would just be, sorry. I mean, just like, what the hell are you doing? And I don't, but they are there. So I'm just like, can you think of these women like human beings? Imagine, if you have a problem with women, think of them as men, okay? I don't even know how to talk to them, to address them. I mean, I spoke to some Taliban and some, but they are, no, I find it very difficult, I'm sorry, to address the Taliban. I just think either they change or it's going to be very difficult. And for these women, don't lose hope, bundle together. I would say we stand by your side. What makes me sometimes a bit sad is that I remember 5 years ago, everybody in this parliament was saying, we stand by your side, we are not going to turn our back on you. And I know that some did. But I still think it is worth fighting for this international solidarity. And even though Iran doesn't look super rosy right now, but there we see how this continuous civil resistance, it also makes life very difficult for very brutal rulers. And I think eventually all these regimes are coming down because they are not in power because they deliver to the people. They are in power because they are repressive and they are punishing. And they only survive if they get worse and worse and worse and worse. And at some point there's an end to it. And often freedom comes surprisingly. Just never give up hope.
Hannah Neumann, member of the European Parliament and a rock-solid supporter and advocate for Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.